Hello and welcome. In this little series of videos, I've been inviting you to meditate with me on a series of poems from George MacDonald's A Book of Strife in the form of a diary, of the Diary of an Old Soul, specifically on the 8 poems from December 14th through the 21st. And in this last video, we're going to be focusing on the poems from the 20th and the 21st. So let's begin. My holy self, thy pure ideal lies, calm in thy bosom, which it cannot leave. This to me is a tremendous statement about self. Now in this poem, there does seem to be a split between ideal self and actual self. And I'm not sure how much I like that. But I do think we're oneself in different aspects. But there is some usefulness to this, and we're going to explore this a little bit more. To this idea of needing to bring the self that God sees and breathes and speaks and calls forth into congruence with the actual self that we are right now through our actions and development. Bringing these into congruence. So, my holy self, thy pure ideal lies, calm in thy bosom, which it cannot leave. So, when MacDonald uses ideal, he means you as God thought you and thinks you, as he calls you forth, has called you forth, and calls you forth. His idea of you, right? That's the ideal self. And of course, that's our true self, his idea of you and its full potential and being. And that lies in the Father's bosom and can't leave. So our self is safe in God, right? We are grounded in him. The idea of us, our being, does rest. Its being, what it is guaranteed by God's being. We are because he is, and what we are is because of what he thinks. Okay, and this is not just a matter of repeating to ourselves, this is the way God sees me, this is the way God sees me, so this is who I truly am. No, it's a matter of this actually sinking into our souls enough that we know it, that we see it, that we are at home, our being is at home in him, and it can't leave that home. So in time, we get to bring ourselves home, right? In eternity, we are home. And we get to bring ourselves in time and enact that and affirm that and experience that. All right. So, home, the heart of God, we can't leave. There's this wonderful passage in Lilith where MacDonald is quoting a passage from the beginning of Purgatorio, the second part of the Divine Comedy. He says, I think I was where I am. And MacDonald, I need to return there where I am. That our purpose in life is to return there where I am. This whole pilgrimage, right? Through hell, through purgatory, to heaven. The whole goal is to return where we actually are, which MacDonald interprets as the heart of God. Now, this may actually be a mistranslation of the Italian, but MacDonald derives this glorious thought from it. And MacDonald believed in our freedom to interpret an imaginative work, and when we get something truly good out of it, that thing is meant. So whether or not this is a mistranslation of Dante, it's a glorious thought, and it is the basis for a key part of Lilith and is what he's talking about here as well. Okay, so then myself unholy, no ideal hies, hither and thither, gathering store to grieve. Now this again, we see this little split between true self, false self, which I don't altogether like. Sinful self, pure Christ-like self. We are one self. But there is some usefulness to thinking this way, right? This is the self that is being driven back and forth. This is us trying on these various ego constructs and these various ego projects and nothing really working. So what we're doing is we're just going back and forth, gathering store to grieve, just material to wound us, right? Because everything that we reap out of that is just going to be more distress, deepening despair, just gathering store to grieve. I love that. Running back and forth, gathering store to grieve. In that ungrounded state, as we talked about in the first two installments of this. Not now, Father. Now it mounts, it flies, to join the true self in thy heart that waits, and one with it be one with all the heavenly mates. So now we're going to see unity in my being, and integrity in my being, when I bring my being home, and my day-to-day self, my action self, my experiential time-bound self gets to join and be congruent with God's thought of it. So now I get to fly to the Father. And just another picture of running up the stairs, flinging the door wide, running into his arms, right? So now we get the image of the bird or the lark, MacDonald's favorite image, literally embracing the heavens. So it mounts, it flies, to join the true self in thy heart that waits, and one with it be one with all the heavenly mates. So when our actual self becomes congruent with the self that God thinks, then we're also in unbroken union with all the other selves that God made. And MacDonald deals with this wonderfully and beautifully in his sermon, The New Name, where he speaks of us each having a chamber in the heart of God, so to speak. And in the heart of God, therefore, and in that alone are we related to each other, and we can speak to each other, and we can understand each other, and we can learn from each other. And we can receive that aspect of God that the other is meant to reveal to us. So now we have the resolution of our relation with everybody else as well. So only when we come back home do we have that resolution of how to love each other and how to receive from each other as well. Because now we are all together as expressions of God's thought, and we get to actually see each other for the first time as perfect expressions of his thought. All right. And then the final poem, the 21st, he talks about Christ in his active work of bringing this congruence between the actual self, the time self, and the eternal self, which is also Kierkegaard's concern in The Sickness Unto Death, because he sees the self as the part of us which forges a living synthesis between our temporal and eternal aspects. All right. So the 21st. Let's see if I can remember the 21st. I'm going to pause for a second and just remember it. All right. Trusting thee, Christ, I kneel and clasp thy knee, cast myself down and kiss thy brother feet. One self thou, and the Father's thought of thee. Ideal Son, thou hast left the perfect home. Ideal brother, to seek thy brothers come. Thou know'st their angels all, God's children sweet, and of each two will make one holy child complete. So trusting thee, Christ, I kneel and clasp thy knee, cast myself down and kiss thy brother's feet. One self thou, and the Father's thought of thee. So in Jesus, we have the eternal perfect synthesis, so there's never been a split between who he is in his life and his action and the Father's thought of him. He's always actively willed to be what God has willed him to be. And so now, through Jesus, now we get to experience the joining together of God's thought of us and our temporal selves. And yeah, we get to experience that synthesis, and we get to experience it through Jesus. Ideal son, thou hast left the perfect home. Ideal brother, to seek thy brothers come. Thou know'st their angels all, God's children sweet, and of each two wilt make one holy child complete. So there's the image there of all these, the joining together and the making congruent of all the temporal children, or not yet fully lived into the being that God made, bringing them all together with God's idea of them. And this is so much like, the idea in Lilith of the little ones, the children, and how Adam and Eve and their daughter Mara gather them, and for each one, they each one get to sleep in the house, and during that sleep, that process takes place where there's that joining together of the ideal and the actual through that gift of rest. So I hope this has been helpful. We've gone from the arc in the 14th of not enough life. This is not life. What I'm experiencing is not life, but you are life. You have life from me. And from this being a leaf wind blown, driven through chaos, to this idea of the dynamic grounding of our selfhood through rest and receiving rest, and how this happens through the Son, that He's done it first, and so He can actually conduct us, can actually lead us into it. And this is how MacDonald sees Jesus' work, as the older brother who, having been there, can lead us into it, can lead us into the experience, can teach us the motions of death, but the kind of death through which we lay off our weariness and our despair and enter into life. Teach us the motions of riding the crest of the creation wave and willing with the Father. And this is how MacDonald sees the gospel according to Jesus. For MacDonald, the gospel according to Jesus is, come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me. That's the gospel according to Jesus, that we have that opportunity to learn the motions from Him. And that is a restful state of being, and not a frantic one. Yes, we have to will or never more be free, but we don't have to figure it out on our own. We get to ride the crest of the creation wave. We get to will with the Son and with the Father. And this is about, so in these 8 poems, from the 14th through the 21st, I see a tremendous synthesis of what he's going to expand on in the unspoken sermons. And it's tremendous because I was just going to go to the 21st, but the 22nd is him saying, you know what? I'm getting really close to the end of these diary poems. And after that, I'm not going to be writing these diary poems, and I'm not going to do this another year. I'm not going to do this again. Instead, I'm going to start writing sermons. And so, literally, the very next poem, December 22nd, is, to a slow end I draw these daily words, nor think such words often to write again. Rather, as light the power to me affords, Christ new and old would to my friends unbind, through words he thought, through words he spoke, help to the thought behind. Unfold the heart with which he drew his men, set forth his rule o'er devils, animals, corn, and wind. So he's saying, okay, I'm going to stop writing these diary poems. I'm going to start writing sermons. And so we have this beautiful transition, but this sequence of poems from the 14th through the 21st is an amazing synthesis of what his message that he's going to unfold in the sermons, and then again in Lilith, with this central problem of selfhood and how he sees it resolved through the gift of rest and coming back home. Thanks. And I look forward to talking with you again in the future about more of these ideas.